Good morning. My name is Bella Naiman. I'm the founder of New York City Jewelry Week, and welcome to the 7th annual celebration of jewelry in New York. Our theme this year is Wander and Wander, which is a mouthful, but it's something that connects consumers and makers through a shared sense of awe, and that how do they do it moment, right? Whenever you pick up a piece of jewelry, at least I know I always think to myself, how did they do it? And I look at the front and I look at the back, and I know that that's something that both people who buy jewelry and people who make jewelry do so frequently. Because there is that wonder moment of, this is an incredible work of art, and so many hands, or maybe just a set of hands touched it, but nonetheless, so much went into the creation of this piece. And then the wander aspect speaks to the journey, both the physical and the emotional journey, that goes into the creation of a piece. And so the inspirations, the materials that can arise from countless sources, whether it's from within ourselves or from the world around us. So the 4 talks that we have planned for you this afternoon will each speak to this theme in their own ways. And I hope that you will consider staying for all 4 talks. But if you did not take a week of work to be here with us, you can also catch the virtual New York City Jewelry Week. We have talks premiering on our YouTube channel. And then we're also recording these programs here, so you can enjoy them later on. And even if you're hearing them live, you can always tell your friends later, I heard an incredible program and you should listen to it too. So I hope that you will enjoy the programs that we have put together for you this week. We have 140 events taking place throughout the city. You can find our complete schedule on our website, which is probably how you got here, so you know about our website already. But just in case, if you found us through Eventbrite, please go to our website. It's nycjewelryweek.com for the entire program of events. And then, as I mentioned, our YouTube channel has about 20 talks that are going to be premiering this week as well. So there's really a lot there. And that's kind of part of the journey as well. So before we begin officially with our first talk, I want to thank the Museum of Art and Design for being our official museum partner. And I also want to thank the incredible sponsors that help us get to where we are. And there is a slide that names some of those sponsors, but I also want to call them out, and that is eBay, Jewelers Mutual, Heritage, and IGI, as well as these other incredible companies that I hope you get to know and visit their websites as well, because without them, we wouldn't be able to be here today. Oh, and one other thing, as you go around enjoying New York City Jewelry Week, we have an amazing jewelry walk planned. It's a treasure hunt, and you can download the app. And we have a dozen retailers that are participating. And if you visit all 12, you're eligible to win a 1-carat Misfit Canadian oval diamond. So that's what I'm doing this week. And I hope you will all join me. So, with that being said, I'm going to switch hats from introducing Jewelry Week to introducing our panel, which is Gold, Artistry, and Value. And I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists onto the stage. If we can give them a round of applause. Okay, well, thank you. This is a program that I'm really excited about because I really wanted to, it's something that I essentially was planning even as I was developing Jewelry Week this year. And so it's called Gold, Artistry, and Value is the name of our talk, but I want to speak about artistry as it precedes the word value in the title of this program, because while value is on everyone's mind, I want to focus on what makes this yellow metal so alluring. And so we have an esteemed group of speakers, Joy BC, Bliss, Sheryl Jones, Joe Cavatoni, And I think you're in for a real treat. So, while this conversation has become, the conversation on gold has become, I think, equally relevant for consumers as it has for the jewelry industry. And so, as you all know, the value of gold keeps going up. And, you know, every time I turn on the television, I hear that there's a run on gold bars at Costco. So it makes me wonder, well, how is this affecting, you know, the industry, and how is it affecting the jewelers who are using this metal to make their pieces? And also, is this now a conversation that people who are looking to invest in gold zooming in on as well? And so I thought it would be a really wonderful way to open this conversation during Jewelry Week, as we hope that, you know, we speak to both consumers and people within the industry. So that being said, I would like to start with you, Joy. On your website, you describe yourself as an artist and a goldsmith working with noble metals. Can you please introduce your work to us and tell us why working with gold is so important to you?
Hello. Oh, it's on. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, it's okay.
And we did a mic check.
Yeah, we did. It was all good, but I think I can project it. So I describe myself as a goldsmith, a scholar, and a sculptress, because all of these things are encompassed within my work. I think sometimes it's interesting how human beings like to categorize things, but there are so many crossovers in different aspects. But I am a specialist specifically in metallurgy and noble metals. And when we talk about noble metals in the periodic table, it's the group such as platinum, palladium, silver, and gold. And gold is my favorite noble metal to work in. And I love silver too, hence I bought a piece which is made of silver and gold to exemplify that. But yeah, I hand make everything from start to finish, and I think about from the molecular structure to the visual, to the tactile, to so many different aspects of that. So yeah, that's if I answered that.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm showing some images of your work here,
So yeah,
so people get a sense of your work as well. And then some gold bars. Okay, so my next question is for you, Bliss. Can you introduce your brand and your vision, please? And in 2017, you transitioned your casting to be certified recycled precious metals in alignment with a vision of respect for the environment. You are committed to transparency and ethical practices in your business, and you're also part of the United Nations Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. Can you speak to this as well, and tell us also about you know, the United Nations Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network?
Hi, I'm Bliss Lau. A little bit about what I do. I first started in jewelry as a body chain designer. And so when I started making fine jewelry, I made my first piece, which I call the kaleidoscope ring. And it's one ring made of 4 pieces. And the concept around the way I think about jewelry is everyday jewelry. And I design a wardrobe of jewelry. And so pieces that will combine and move around the body. I'll have a necklace that can then click off and put onto the ear. And I like the idea of exploring an offer of choice for people. And also pieces that connect to us and our heritage and what's important to us.
Can you hear me? There we go. I don't project very well, my apologies. So in 2018, when I realized that when I was getting gold casted from casters and I asked them where it came from, I was sort of pushed off that wasn't an important thing, and I felt like it was really important. So I started to really think about how provenance and understanding where your pieces come from, where the materials come from is important. Because once I got to a place where I had been designing for a long time, it became intrinsic that beautiful things were of course what your goal was, but I wanted more. I wanted to have an impact. And so I started to think about firstly recycled. That was my first touch point in terms of transitioning my business into a conscious business. And I moved everything over to recycled casting, and then as I started learning more about recycled, I started to understand the difference between artisanal mined and became a Fairmined Gold became part of the Fairmined Gold initiative, and I can explain now. Bella has asked me to explain the differences between how we think about gold. So I can do that now. I have some notes. Those, I assume most of you already know this, but when I look at where I'm going to get my gold, there's sort of three variables that I think about. And the first one is artisanal, and artisanal is essentially mined by small communities, individuals, and oftentimes that can benefit some of the most marginalized people in the world. So that's a great benefit, right? But then also in many cases it's informal, it can be illegal, they can be using mercury and polluting. So these are some challenges that we run into. I work with Fairmined because they are trying to fight those things and have created formalization and systems to support mining communities. There's also large-scale mining. So for instance, that gold bar at Costco is created by a mining company called Newmont, and Newmont is very well known for having pretty good practices. So that is a large scale that's using, there's less human impact, right? Because you're then moving into highly industrialized and mechanized mining. And the benefit or problems there would be that there's less people, right? So you're not supporting as many humans, but at the same time, maybe they have geologists that are coming in and they oftentimes will have a plan for reclamation, which is not always the case for artisanal mining. And then we have recycled. So recycled is like my first touch point into thinking about conscious gold. And I thought that was a great solution. And now as I'm moving more into it, you're learning, which I think we all understand, that a lot of things get folded into the recycled. You're initially certified recycled is supposed to be coming out of your mouth, just like dental and post-consumer metals and gold, but also a list of gold is going into that mix. And so I'm now questioning if recycled is the right path forward and wondering if maybe we can move into some sort of version between ASM and LSM, but all of that is contingent upon understanding where your gold is being mined and having transparency in how you're able to make your purchases and do your casting. So all of those combined are part of why I am now part of the UN Fashion Lifestyle Network, which is a really interesting network. It essentially is people who are all committed to, depending on which SDGs Sustainable Development Goals from the UN you're committed to, is a group of like-minded people and designers throughout the world who are interested in pushing the conversation forward and having the hard conversations and trying to get things to move along. I think if you want to be a part of it, all you have to do is go on the UNFLN website and apply and explain what commitment you have. And it's actually a really beautiful community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for explaining, for defining those terms also, because I think it's important for consumers to understand, first of all, the amount of research that jewelers undergo to decide which materials and which path they want to pursue, because it also in many ways affects the price of the jewelry as well. And so Sheryl, you are one of the few women with a jewelry store in the Diamond District. Can you tell us more about your work? And also, you have supervised diamond production for an American manufacturer. So you're very familiar with conversations on fluctuations in the market.
Mm-hmm.
What are the discussions that you're now having with your clients?
Okay. So I started in the business about 24 years ago, and I left a career in entertainment PR, and I decided to get into the business because I had a passion for gemstones and diamonds. And that's probably more of my focus, but the way that gold complements gemstones and diamonds is amazing, and I think that that's where the magic happens in my jewelry. In terms of what I do a tremendous amount of custom pieces, and I work with clients trying to create something that's very precious and bespoke to them. Operating on 47th Street, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a completely different environment. And if you're walking down the street, you hear people say, we buy gold and diamonds. So this idea of gold and sometimes repurposing your gold or selling your gold for scrap price is always front of mind when people come to see me. I think that this is an issue that we're kind of getting more into as people are talking about what happens to the gold that I scrap. Some of my clients ask, can I make a piece from the gold that I give you? Unfortunately, most of the casting places and refineries on 47th Street don't allow people to do that. And I think that that's part of the bigger issue of what happens to the gold, how it gets recycled, how can you follow the origin of the piece of gold that you get, because so much of it is melted down and repurposed and changes hands. So I think that those are the issues. My clients are also big on investing in gold. They want to buy gold coins, they want to buy gold bars. That's also something that they see as part of diversifying their portfolio, their investment portfolio. So I think that these are all issues as we're talking about the price of gold, how it fluctuates, when to get into the game, when not to. At this point, buying a piece of gold or a gold bar when it's so high can be really challenging. So I think that all of these things are part of what you invest in when you're buying a piece of jewelry to wear versus when you're buying a piece of gold that you want to sit in your vault box.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Joe, you joined the World Gold Council in September of 2016 to lead business strategy for the Americas, which includes oversight of investor relations, product solutions, research, and marketing, as well as global ETF platforms. Essentially, the World Gold Council, I think, is at the forefront of educating people about gold.
We are.
So can you share, please, with us what conversations you're having?
I will. And let's be honest, you're all looking at these wonderful artists and saying, why is that guy in a suit at the end of that panel up there on stage? Did he get off at the wrong subway stop? And the answer is no. He didn't. And he's going to try and bring it all back together because everything that's been talked about, interestingly enough, the World Gold Council has an area of focus to help the industry. So we're made up of the world's largest large-scale miners as members, and our role is to promote and educate on gold so that all consumers of any kind can feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing when they make a purchase or make a sale. So we have data and insights, all this really wonderful information. For over 30 years, we've been tracking demand trends. And actually, ironically, 2024 is the first year that the demand for jewelry has dropped below the demand for investment in gold. That's the first time it's ever happened. And actually, it's still substantial, but that shift has taken place. Now, that doesn't mean that the largest stock of gold in the world, which is still jewelry, is going away by any means, but it's a shift in sentiment. And it's because gold is kind of unique amongst commodities and amongst precious metals and amongst money. People see the value of holding it and owning it as a part of their wealth creation, their savings, and also their fear of protection against losing wealth when things aren't working well. So I've listened to everyone's quick introduction, and let me just start by saying the World Gold Council is involved with mining companies around their responsible mining practices. We've set standards and are working with the industries to make those companies better and those standards better. We have work that we're focusing on related to artisanal mining. And we have work that we're focused on around tracking and tracing. So there's so much to do as an industry, and there's so many different moving parts and different components in the industry. Our goal is to make it better so that it's trusted, it's transparent, and people feel better about adopting it and owning it. Now, I've kind of rambled a bit here, but I think pointing to the example of Newmont, that's a great example where we work with Newmont to get their standards to a higher level. But thinking about that artisanal space, that growing space, that's an area where we've just launched a program that's focused on calling to action nations that need to focus on it. Dominic Raab, the former Deputy Prime Minister under Boris Johnson, has issued a paper that simply highlights 24 different actions that governments could take to deal with a lot of these challenges in the artisanal space. And then I guess the last thing that I'll talk to very quickly, because I've rambled a bit here, when it comes to recycling, that's a word that needs to be defined. And that's what the industry is trying to work towards. There are agencies that are working towards it, but really truly understanding when something is recycled versus greenwashed. We can unpack all of that if you'd like, but lots going on, lots of work that we do, not only around data and insights and showing you how gold fits into an investment portfolio, but just changing the market, making it better.
Thank you so much. So Bliss, I want to go back to you because one of the things that, you know, as you're researching, you mentioned recycled gold, fair mine gold, single mine origin, you're also taking this back to your clients. And you are having conversations with them, you're also offering options to them. For example, and what I, you know, and I know this is also particularly important to you because for you, building your business on transparency and trust is of optimal importance. And so what I noticed on your website is that you offer your designs in 18 karat recycled gold, 14 karat recycled gold, both with natural and lab-grown diamonds. So consumers, as they're, you know, as they're shopping, they see all of the prices laid out before them, and they can choose essentially what's right for them. Can you speak a little bit about this? Because I've never seen that done before, and I think it's so interesting, and I think it's so important too, you know, for consumers to have all of these options available to them, but also to kind of, you know, like weigh their options and figure out what's important to them and what fits their, you know, price point too, of course.
Yeah, I think that, I guess based on the methodology of how I approach design at all, that it's about choice. And so then when it comes to a client coming to me and thinking about what is the type of metal they want or the type of diamonds they want, I think it's really important to explain it. But I also, you know, there's a word, I'm from Hawaii, and there's a word that we use in Hawaii called kuleana. It's not something that really exists in, I don't know, maybe someone knows a different culture that has a word like this. Kuleana means like, what is the thing that you're the thing inside your soul that you are meant to give to the world, and the thing that brings you and like feeds your soul, right? And so part of my kuleana, I think, I come from a family of teachers, is that making jewelry is such a wonderful experience, but also understanding what the potential impacts can be by making a single purchase. You can make one purchase from a fair mine gold miner in Colombia, and that can impact their lives. And I think that's a really interesting thing. You can buy one massive emerald from Sheryl, and she can tell you where it came from. You know, I think like this is one of the things that I find so wonderful about our industry.
Mm.
So I like giving those options. Or are you anti-carbon footprint? So let's go with my SCS certified lab diamonds. You know, so there's all these different variables, and I think it's an interesting thing. And I also think oftentimes I have first-time jewelry buyers coming down to sit down, and maybe they haven't thought about how their values can affect their pocket, affect their purchases, and affect the people that buy them. So I think it's a really nice opportunity to give that to them and let them sit with it, and then maybe they'll approach how they buy differently.
Mm.
And then I figure like that's a huge win for me, and wherever it goes from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two questions. Sheryl, I'm going to go to you first because one of the things, you know, we were speaking about values, we're speaking about having meaningful conversations with clients, and one of the things that we discussed on our call was education.
Right.
And the conversations and like what you know, you touched upon this a little bit earlier too about, you know, buying a bar of gold versus buying a piece of jewelry, but also what are the standards in the industry. So can you speak a little about that? And
Yes, we were talking about how sometimes customers are confused when they buy a Cuban link chain and it weighs however much and it's 18 karat gold or 14 karat gold, what that value is versus buying a bar of gold that has not been worked. And I think that people have to understand what the difference is between 14 karat, 18 karat, and pure gold. I think that there's a lot of confusion about that sometimes. So that's part of the education process. When people come to me, what are you really looking to do? If you really want the value to basically be in a, not a lockbox, but remain as close as possible to purity, then you need to buy a bar of gold. If you're trying to wear a piece of jewelry and you want something that is fashionable but also has some value to it, then a higher carat of gold is probably the better way to go, and for these reasons. So I think it's all about talking about these things, understanding what people's values are and what they really want to do with the gold. But I think that a lot of times people, especially in America, don't know the difference in the carat value of gold.
So before we switch to values, Joe, because I want to speak about the report that just came out in London,
Sure.
speaking to values, I just want to speak to value of a different type with Joy for a second, because we spoke about the different gold alloys that you use in your work, and you work with a lot of 22 karat gold, and if you want to just speak to that a little bit too.
Yeah, I think values are really interesting because I think all values are perceived values that are made by human beings, okay? So in that there is such a, you can really deep dive into that. But I love working with gold, and there are reasons why certain materials have been used for centuries because of their material properties and their working properties. One of the alloys I work with a lot is an 18 karat yellow gold alloy, and also Lega Pinton, which is a specific red gold alloy that comes from the Padova school that one of my mentors who I was an apprentice to, Giovanni Corvaia, taught me to make. So my heritage is, I'm half Italian, half Londonish. I don't even say British because I think it's specifically being from London, which is a world city which has so many incredible influences. But when I was awarded a scholarship to go and work with Giovanni for a year, and I went between London and Italy, and I've always been enamored by this specific movement, well, a school that was a state school in northern Italy, where Pinton, who was one of the professors, came up with this specific alloy which has a really hard, it's a very strong alloy which has a lot of copper in it. So you take two soft metals, which is gold and copper, and when you alloy them, they become incredibly strong, which I think is interesting in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved science. I think it's interesting, like understanding how materials and why they work, what they do. And the more you work with metals, the more they reveal their properties to you. And it's through mistakes, melting things, working 75 hours on something, and it reticulating and knowing how to recycle, in a very true sense, those, melting that down, turning it back into an ingot, drawing it down into wire or sheet or casting. You know, metal is metamorphic, and that is one of the most incredible properties about it, and particularly gold has that aspect. So yeah, I love gold. I feel like you talk to people who work with gold and fire, there's a feeling that it draws you in. I think musicians have it when they play instruments. You become so focused in the space where you're with the material, when you're soldering or working it, there's a connection between you and that metal. So I also love silver. I have recently been working a lot more with platinum as well and trying to understand that and how different its properties are. For example, using it on charcoal, you can't because it becomes incredibly brittle, like how different, yeah, just the working methods and the properties of the material and how you engage with it.
Amazing. I love that quote, gold is metamorphic. It's fabulous. Joe, can you speak to values in terms of how you're doing, studies to
Sure.
show how, well, you tell them.
Sure. There's a lot that's going on. I want to pick up on what you were talking about. And in all candor, when I first got involved with the World Gold Council, I was a financial markets guy. And actually, I started talking to people about gold, and I thought gold was gold. And then you really get into the detail with people in the gold market. They're like, this is 995 gold, this is 49s gold, 5G gold from China, and you're like, what in the world are we talking about? I thought gold was gold. So one thing I think is important to understand is that there's a lot of work being done at an industry level to simplify those definitions and give people a much cleaner and clearer understanding. Because a lot of people just look at a screen and go, that's an ounce of gold, and that is trading at $2,611 today. And then you try and look at a piece of jewelry, or you try and look at a coin or a bar, and you go, oh, let's do the math, and it happens quick, and you get confused, and you ignore all of the artistic value, all the numismatic collectible value, you ignore all of this different stuff. And so we're working to kind of help people get a standard gold unit defined, giving a base price and say, this is it. And then from there you can build on to that and understand the different caratage or the different sizes and shapes or different locations and different applications and everything else that goes along with all of the value that artists bring or, you know, scarcity brings to a piece. So that's a big body of work that we're doing under the guise of what we call track, trace, and gold bar integrity. It's a lot of work. It's going to take a long time to get really well embedded into the systems, but it's taking, you know, place in places like London. It's starting to happen. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye on the gold bar integrity program that we're running. And it even involves blockchain technology where we're actually asking everyone who's dealing in the wholesale market, log all of your gold into this database, track it from the source. Our mining companies are being told that they have to put their gold into the system. So hopefully we get on a glide path of tracking and tracing. But then when it comes to other aspects of, you know, understanding what we're doing and how it's having value in the industry, I think you're making reference to the fact that we just issued the report yesterday. And this report's really focused on artisanal mining. And I think, Bella, I think you probably said it, or maybe it was Joy, but what mining like that can bring to a community is immense. It's incredible, and if you have an opportunity to see it, which I have in many different countries, it's impressive. But you also feel, you know, pretty emotional about what's going on in these places. When things are being done the wrong way, because the price is high and this is the only way we're going to get money out of the ecosystem, it's a terrible thing. Using the wrong kind of materials, using the wrong type of labor, doing it for the wrong reasons, using these funds for illicit activities or criminal activities, it's not right. So the report that we've issued is literally a 24-action paper that's focused, again, on governments like the US to simply say, you need to take some action here. You need to focus on what's happening in the industry. You need to understand that, yes, the Newmonts of the world, as mentioned, they do it right. But that's about 65% of the mining worldwide. The rest is being done the wrong way. So we can either ignore it and have it continue to perpetuate, or we can actually focus in and say, let's take a few actions. A good example of this is that we've worked with central banks who have a natural need to buy gold as part of their reserve portfolios. They're holding it. They're saying, look, I need this as something that I hold in my World Bank recognized reserves. And actually, you go to the Philippines and the central bank's in the market buying gold, and you turn to the right and you see that there's huge amounts of gold being mined in an artisanal manner. And we've connected the dots. We've actually simply said to the Philippines government, if the central bank needs gold, why don't you apply standards at these local mine sites and pay these people promptly and buy it from them? And actually, it's a mechanism that's actually working. So it's actually really amazing to see it in action because you're putting money into the community on a local scale. You're actually giving the central bank what it needs. You're linking it back to prices that are recognized on an international level and applying those international standards. So it's a good example. Again, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot of pushing of these governments to get involved. But they're liking the ideas. They're realizing the importance of it. So I think it's a great example of using our heft, using our resources, and then a little bit of using a little bit of the blame game or a bit of the call to action mentality to kind of put people on the market and get them to do something different, better.
So Joe, I have a question for you. I read the report.
Yes.
Well, half of it. It's really long.
It is long.
And it was just yesterday. So I agree with you that governments need to take more action, but what about refiners? Like, my understanding is there's like 5 major refiners in Switzerland.
Yep.
And only 1 or 2 of them are asking any questions to
Well,
people who are bringing the gold. And those are private companies.
they are.
So why put all of the weight on the governments rather than asking refiners to take a little bit more responsibility?
So refiners are actually, so if you think about what we're trying to do, we kind of cast a pretty wide net. Part of it is on governments to call to action locally with respect to artisanal mining. Part of the Gold Bar Integrity Program that we're running is going after mining, large scale, but also transportation and refining. And actually, what we're attempting to do is using these different programs to shine the light on the good and the right and the fair and reasonable, and give the market the opportunity to identify those that don't want to play in the game. If you're in the light, you're okay. If you're not, then buyer beware.
So that you're saying it will fold out with just general business.
It will actually come together with not only the work we're doing with artisanal mines and governments, but it'll come together with what the work is that we're doing with organizations like the London Bullion Market Association, known as the LBMA. They have a standard that they're applying. They're using the same technologies, the same standards that we're looking to get in place to have these refiners buy from trusted sources. Actually, a good example of where there's challenges in the Middle East. Right? That's actually, Africa is a large source of artisanal mining. The Middle East is a well-known routing of that artisanal mining gold, and it goes into wherever. And actually, we want to track from the source. So if we can get government to help us track from the source, not only in large scale, but on small scale, then you start getting into the place where you can say, this is in the light. Deal in the light, or if you're not in the light, then don't deal. Or buyer beware. But it's not an easy task, because a lot of this is commercially oriented. Simply put, like we have a lot of relationships, including relationships with organizations like bullion banks, like JP Morgan. And when you go to them and say, use this technology, they're like, oh, that's another piece of technology. We don't need to spend it. Ours is good enough. And you're like, no, yours isn't good enough. We need everyone to be on the same platform, talking the same language, and sharing this information in a global way. And it means you have to keep pushing and you have to keep fighting these commercial interests, particularly at the refining side.
I know when we were doing our call, the tracking and tracing of the, where the gold is coming from, you were all really, passionate about that topic because it's really quite difficult to know where it's coming from. Do you want to, anybody want to?
I was just going to say that, this whole traceability issue, I think, is incredibly hard in gold. And just coming from the diamond perspective, it's been incredibly challenging too, because, for instance, there were large sanctions against Russian diamonds, but they were still coming into the US, even though there were governments that were holding and saying that they weren't going to import them, but they were coming through another country as finished goods. So it's a really difficult thing, I think, in terms of traceability. You have a product that, unless it's locked down in origin, but it changes, it liquefies, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It melts down, it becomes something else. So I think it's a challenge for all of our minerals and resources. How do you really understand the origin of something and make sure that the people who are doing the right thing aren't penalized because the few bad actors that get partners that still bring in goods, they still manage to keep it going. So I think that's a challenge for for gold as well as diamonds.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's almost a daunting task, call it boiling the ocean in many ways, but it has to be attempted.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't even talked about, we're talking about just the new mining
Right.
and the new gold that's coming out of the ground. We're not talking about the
Stuff that's been sitting.
$16 trillion worth of gold that's already out there.
Exactly.
We manage ETFs, exchange traded funds that hold bars. We have 90,000 of those large bars.
Right.
And we're forcing our custodians to put them into the database. Put them in. We want them in. You have to start somewhere and get going. It's a daunting task, but we've got 34 of the world's largest mining companies. They're all going on. If we can get the call to action around artisanal mining and governments with their funding to help us, then we've got something more with the LBMA and others. I mean, it's a long body of work, and I mean, I jokingly told you that we were talking about a 30-year plan, and I thought to myself, my God, I don't know how old I'll be by the time we finish this thing, but joking aside, it has to be done. It has to be done.
Bliss, I was wondering too, I mean, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, when you're speaking to your clients and you're, explaining to them, fair mine gold and single mine origin gold and artisanal mining, do the consumers see this as a benefit to them that you are so educated and that you've done the research and, that, like, do they feel like, even if they are spending more on their pieces, but they're, I don't want to say investing, but they're supporting value-driven decisions. Do they see that as a benefit, essentially?
I think, of course, absolutely. I think that most of the collectors who come to me already know my values and share the values. And so it makes them feel really good and makes them feel like the investment that they're making means more than just the piece. And I think that's great. And alternatively, there's some people who come to me for design, and then when I explain it to them, they're very excited. They're very much the people who say, I can't do the fair mine gold at the additional 25%. We're going to do recycled, and we still feel good about that. And there's no shame in that. It's also, there's the budgets, and the cost of gold is significant. So I think it just depends. But I think they like our ethos, and they like that we're trying to move things forward and how important that is to us.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's wonderful to see you doing it for the right reasons. Because when we all decided in markets to start calling things ESG, and that label took off, so many organizations were, again, I'll use the term commercially oriented, because I think it's important to understand this. We're trying to sell product and sell ideas and sell structures and sell things using ESG as a sales hitch, like a hook to say, oh, this is a little bit better, so you're going to pay more. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right outcome or not. I know for one thing, it's fizzled as an idea, which is a good thing. So when you hear an organization, and no disrespect to the organization, but like S&P trying to tell mining companies what the standard should be for mining, you're like, well, I don't know about that, simply because you're going to make an index that's going to be really well adopted in the financial markets. We actually worked with the 34 mining companies and said, let's write our own standards and hold them to them. And we've done that. And now we're actually consolidating with ICMM, Copper Mark, and others to say, okay, so now we've all got these rules, and these rules are real, and their standards are good. Let's consolidate them. And let's not worry about whether or not it's commercially viable or not. This is what's right for the industry and what's right for these companies to stay going. Otherwise, just stop, because you're doing the wrong thing. And so I think in seeing an organization like yours where you're actually doing it for the right emotional reason, I think it's great.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask, is all of Joe, on your website, can consumers, jewelers, everything's open.
Wide open.
So all of that
free,
education, all of the
takeable.
research that you're doing,
Everything
is
I mean, we've got
there.
reams of it, so I'm going to warn you, there's a lot. But look, there's a section organized around our standards, our market development work. There's a section organized around retail investing, because there's an area there where we help people understand the kind of questions they should be asked so they're not dealing with the wrong kind of outcome there. And then there's reams of research. Like I said, we've tracked the demand for gold, which helps us understand what the price is going to look like going forward for over 30 years. And it's all available. You can sign up, subscribe to the research, have it go in your junk mail, read it.
Well, I mean, that's definitely something that again, because, when you turn on the news and you hear sort of the value of gold going up and consumers wanting to invest in it, I feel like they need to know you're the source, and I feel like they need to have your education behind them. They need to have, they should be able to put into context. Yeah. And so one of the blogs that I read on your website that I thought was really interesting is, how do you begin your journey in investing in gold? And you talk about, even owning gold as part of your IRA, for example. Sure. I mean, so these really important, basic things that I think we should all know and have access to.
100%. Look, in the simplest of terms, a couple of things drive gold's performance long term as an asset. The intrinsic value of gold, that $2,611 I mentioned. Wealth creation, when people get wealthier, they spend on consumer goods like jewelry and they save. Or fear and market risk. That's when the markets go down and they squirrel their money away out of fear. So that's what's long-term driving gold over time. It links literally to nominal GDP, meaning the growth of economies. And it's global. So even when all the news in the markets are talking about how gold should be down because rates are up and inflation, blah, blah, blah in the US, you have to understand that what's driving the gold price is the global consumption of gold. Jewelry overseas, investment overseas, and central banks overseas. And a lot of that's going to continue to play out. Under the new administration, who knows what we're going to get in terms of some of the things that are going to play out. But what we do know is protectionism of the US, probably higher interest rates, inflation, and overseas, fear about our ability to sustain our debt. So people are moving away from dollars and they're buying gold. It's a form of money. Actually, some people do it using jewelry. But ultimately, this is going to keep gold on the radar, going up, and pricing.
Joy, so I want to go back to you because, we also have to think about jewelers who are acquiring gold to make their pieces. And for you, your pieces can take, up to 10 months, if not
Up to
three
3
years. So for you, it's really difficult. Also to price your work as well.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most precious things that we haven't discussed so much is time. And time, what you decide to put into that, it's a combination of things, but I think the hands that make your jewellery is a huge part of it. We're talking about material values, and I think the perception of material values are a man-made construct. And we're talking about gold, and there's always this venerated aspect, or this beguiling and captivating history of gold. But I find it so bizarre that something that came from the darkness of the earth and has been extracted from the earth and has this luminosity and magical presence then goes back, the majority of it, into safes in banks because this idea of world values. And so the history of gold interplays with our perception of values. And for me, as a material, I love working with it. Its presence, its weight, its malleability. But I have to really choose what I'm going to make out of gold. I don't also come from generational wealth. A lot of people, a lot of jewellers that work within the fine jewellery industry come from mining families or from third generation royalty. I've been sculpting and carving and making things that I imbue with intent and love since I was a child, because both my parents are artists. My father is a sculptor, and my mother is a painter and printmaker. They both worked in community projects, and I learned from a young age the importance of making. I think through my hands. So when I'm making a work from start to finish, I think about what am I putting into this piece and how is it going to live beyond it going from my studio. So, for example, the listening aids. I'm wearing a pair of ears now because I want to be a better listener. I think we can all learn from listening better to each other, fostering better relationships, conflict resolution. I also talk a lot, so it was something that I wanted to make as a way of conscientiously doing that. But it's so expensive now, I also think there are so many beautiful other noble metals that you can use. And there is still this aspect. I don't often get asked about how much my pieces weigh or the value of the gold, though a lot of my pieces are really chunky and weighty, and I like the presence of the weight in them. So choosing, okay, am I going to make this in gold or am I going to make it in silver? And all materials come with their own languages and their perceptions because of their histories, and depending on what part of the continent you're on, so jade and pearls, in Japan or in China have a very different meaning and perception. Gold and diamonds, it has a higher value system. Diamonds I find fascinating because really that's the marketing campaign of the 20th century that created still this esteemed value. Diamonds are used in mining materials and to cut stone. You know, I think a tourmaline is as beautiful as an emerald. It just depends in what context and what personal preferences you have. And really, it's the workmanship of the artist. We don't ask or think about, if we look at a Basquiat or a Picasso, how much were the paints or the materials of which that artwork was made. It's so it becomes tricky. You know, gold is, but like all the materials, everything you're wearing, you know, from leather or plastics. Also, how does that piece then exist within society afterwards? So every time you wash something which is made with polyester, you're putting microplastics back into the ocean. Gold, because it's so precious and passed down as heirlooms and is recyclable, it has this element which actually environmentally, impactfully, as something, it gets a lot of bad rep. Sometimes when I think there are, you know, the tech industry also uses gold loads in phones, cobalt. I'm not saying that, oh, you know, this is all bad, so this isn't bad. We need to absolutely address all of these issues and continue that. But it's, again, thinking about how we perceive or engage with all different materials.
Beautiful. Wow. Does anyone have any questions for these panelists? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to give you the mic.
Good morning. This is so great. I want to bounce off of something that Sheryl said that was amplified by joy. I work at the Yale Art Gallery. I spend my time thinking about old stuff and looking at like 18th century Goldsmith records. The bills are often split out. So it will be to the material and to the making. So your teapot will be 24 pounds, but 20 pounds of silver and 4 pounds to the making. So thinking about like the transparency of materials, I was wondering if there's any thought about the transparency of the artistry.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about the time that things take, and I also explain to people that I only make between like 5 and 10 pieces, if that, a year. So I work with, it is just me. I do have a bookkeeper and someone who helps with my newsletters. I'm terrible with administration. So, you know, there is that, and having a studio and paying my overheads. So that all encapsulates within the value of the piece. It's also taken me over 10 years of training to get to this point. So what I was charging for my time when I was an apprentice or a student, in fact, the first ever ear I made was at Glasgow, when I was studying at the Glasgow School of Art, cost £25, and it was a silver ear, and it was an exercise we had about time and if we could produce things in batches, and now some of my, you know, the earpieces are around £5,000, okay? So it's changed from the time now, and I'm making choices of like, what am I putting my time into, or that value, but it's all of that time and life that's got to this point where, you know, there's famously that, I don't know which artist it is, but someone had criticised saying, oh, that only took you 5 minutes to paint that. And he said, it took my whole life to get to the point where I was able to do that. Think of calligraphy and calligraphy artists, like to understand the materials, to be able to work it in a certain way, to be able to even be in a position that you can work with those, all the investment, both financially and time-wise, it's taken to get to that. So, yeah, I mean, I think with secondary market and antiques, I often say to people when they say, oh, I really want this, I'm like, you know, some of the I love antique works, and some of the things you see, the skills, there are less and less people who can do some of those skills or those mechanisms. And I love looking at antique pieces to see that. I think that's answered the question in some way.
I just like to add too, I think that we live in a world in production where it's now just in time. And so people don't have, it's very challenging sometimes to explain how long it really takes to make a piece. So for me to design a piece, it's changes through 7 pairs of hands on 47th Street. The jeweler, the casting person, the setter, the polisher, all of these people are working with their hands. They can only make so many things in a day because they're only producing what they can, make themselves. So I'm trying to explain this a little bit better, but I think that the challenge is when someone looks at a finished piece that looks very simple, it's a wedding band, and maybe that band was made overseas, and they come to you and they say, I want you to make this same band. It takes me longer to make that same band. It's going to cost me more to make that same band. And it's I guess I have to explain to my client the value in waiting and to have it made differently, and to explain why it is different than what maybe was mass produced overseas. And I think that in our industry, there needs to be more of an explanation of, sort of like the difference between what is made, handmade, and what is manufactured. Because sometimes people don't know the difference.
I think that happens a lot with chain.
Yes.
For example, chain is so handmade chain is so different from machine chain, and they both have value and their places, and it depends what the consumer or the collector wants, and it feels different. And same with even the machines that make the chain, whether they're Italian machines, Swiss machines, they're in America, and you have to choose. Yeah, I just think that's there's an assumption sometimes with jewellery that everything is handmade, and also if it's not, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different values. Yeah.
I'm gonna come your way because you can have the mic.
Thanks. I was wondering, earlier you talked about recycled gold, and I was just wondering if you could talk more about the sources and the market for recycled gold and some of the issues in the market, and then how you're approaching them.
Sure. Shall I start? Yeah, I think, I think probably one of the most important things to understand about recycled gold is when we see prices that get higher, and you look at the demand and the supply profiling of what happens in the gold market, jewelry tends to come back in as a source of gold for recycling. So I'd say to you, we're probably at the highest levels we've seen in recycling in the last 10 years in terms of the percentage of what the supply that gets produced on an annual basis that gets met by the demand. And I'd say to you that most of the supply that we see tends to come from overseas. India and China are two of the largest markets for sourcing of jewelry supply. What I'd say is important from our perspective is that there's no definition that the industry at any level has landed on for recycling. And so we're working with organizations like ISO and others to try and get a clean, clear, concise definition so you can start with that. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where I could take one of the large bars that we hold for an ETF, send it off to Switzerland, recast it, put a new date on it, and say it now meets the new standards that the LBMA have put out for good delivery and better mining practices. And I recycled all that. And that's not recycling at all. That's just recasting. So I think that the work that ISO and others are going to be doing around landing on the definition, and it's not done, will be important to keep an eye on. Because that'll really truly decide and decipher what is truly recycled and what is greenwashing or some form of just recasting of gold. The last thing that I put out there is there's a lot of publicity that a lot of tech companies are getting and electronics companies are getting around trying to say that they're just using nothing but fully recycled materials, and I think that's a bit of a stretch of the truth. We'll see how that plays out. I don't have much more to say on it, but I think saying we use nothing but entirely fully recycled metals is a stretch, in my opinion.
Joe, I have a question. I've been in a couple of rooms at industry gold conferences where fights arose among the executives. over the name of recycled being changed. Can you share some of the names that are being thrown out there? I can't remember them.
You
Can
probably
you-
know them
I can't-
better than I do, but I know that it's an
Pretty
ugly
terrible.
topic, and it really is a hard thing to get a clean and clear definition on. But it's hard work that has to be agreed. Someone has to at some point settle in and say, this is the definition of recycle. I think recasting and I'm trying to think some of the other names that get thrown around.
Okay, there's some more questions back here. So
Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you for today. I just have a question, and it's the council, this World Gold Council. How is it funded?
So there's two ways that we're funded. The first is we have members that pay dues, and that's a good portion of our funding. But second, we offer access to 2 exchange-traded funds. And the fees that we collect for that are directed back to pay for the 75 staff we have worldwide, as well as push for these initiatives that are focused on market development, industry standards, and the like.
And just to follow up, these members, are they individuals, are they companies, are they...
These are the world's largest gold mining companies. So examples would include Newmont, Barrick, and others.
we have one more question.
This is just a follow-up on the issue of recycled gold. I come from a textile or fashion background, and I think it's more well-known amongst consumers and in the industry what the implications are of greenwashing and why recycling textiles is so difficult, and why people or companies in the industry want to kind of greenwash and have loose definitions, because it's so difficult to truly recycle and upcycle instead of downcycling complex blended textiles and fabrics. But with gold, because I'm newer to metals, like what are the difficulties and implications of truly recycling? I don't think I understand why it's difficult or costly, or why people would want to greenwash instead of using the obvious large source that you have of post-consumer products available to recycle.
So I can speak towards one of the most complicated things about recycled metal, and it isn't actually the recycling itself. It's that there could be an illicit miner who is, devastating the Amazon. They mine that gold, they cast it into a hammer, and they fly to Dubai 2 days later. They send it over there, it goes into the refiner, and it is now sold as certified recycled gold. And this is the thing that is challenging. And that miner may have dumped a pile of mercury into the Amazon, into the ocean, that then makes it so we can't eat fish. These are the things that are really scary, but that's kind of why formalization in ASM mining is something that even the large scale mining sector is looking towards, because we don't want that to happen. So the situation with recycled is that it's become so popular that the demand has overrun the supply. And so now you have more of a window for those types of things to happen, and we don't want that.
Yeah, I think you've given a great example. I'll go back again to the other example where if there's a standard for a certain type of gold that a financial instrument might hold, I can just simply send it off to a refiner in Switzerland, recast it, do nothing good for the environment, bring it back, and then go out and try and tell investors, this is newer, better, safer gold, cleaner gold, and it's just wrong.
And the question
we
is,
want to rule things like that out. So.
And the question is, who decides what's new? Who decides what's better? And what does that mean? And where does the international standard lie? And so that's, I think, where
Right.
the naming and understanding how we all collectively agree upon that is very important.
I've seen bars that were cast in 1921 where the standards for mining and refining were definitely a lot worse than they are today. But is it better to recast that bar, or is it better just to leave it? And I think the answer is leave it. Don't recycle it. Or don't put it through the system again.
So, we have multiple, okay, wow, okay. Chantal, how are we doing on time? Because we have like 3-4 more questions. Oh my God, they're gonna hate me, I have to choose. Okay, okay, well, they're all here, so after this program, you can all ask them questions in the lobby as well. They are here and they're all incredible. Okay, can I just do these two women here, and then, is that okay? Okay.
Hi, this question is for Joe. You said that you're basically holding large companies and banks accountable. Are you holding large jewelers accountable, like the Cartiers and the Tiffany's of the world? It would probably make sense for them to tell their clients that they're doing all of these great things, but is there any accountability behind it?
We will get to them. Yes, not yet, but yes, they're on. We have it, like, if you could see the whiteboard in my CEO's office, there's a map of everyone in the value chain. Mind the market, we call it. And actually, you got to start at the beginning where you can start at the source. So that's where we're starting our efforts, which is track and trace from the source. Well, hopefully sooner than 30 years. You'll be in the business 30. I'll be long and gone by that point. I'm just kidding.
So thank you very much. I'm Ani Katchin of Ani Fine Jewelry, and the topic is the gold, artistry, and value. And this question is to all of the panelists, and please tell me if this is correct. So if you are an artisan, not a large-scale jewelry maker, and you are purchasing a gem that is traceable from somebody like Moya, you are hitting goal number 5, which means that you are promoting safe, fair, and safe, fair working conditions. If you are an individual artist and you are purchasing your gold, which is, let's say, Harmony Gold, you are supporting decent work and economic growth, which is goal number 8. Is that not correct? And then that also promotes sustainable consumption and production patterns, which is goal number 12. And if you are doing these things and you're only making what is wanted, meaning you're not mass producing and people are buying because it's beautiful and they like it, and yes, you are charging 25 to 30% more because you are doing these things, you're aligning with generations, you're creating a safer planet for future generations, which aligns with climate action goal number 13 and life on land goal, which is number 15. So what I'm saying is that, you know, if you're doing the right things, hopefully people will identify you and they'll connect with you and you're making what's wanted. Nobody ever said, Picasso, what kind of paint did you use? So a masterpiece never goes out of style. So please speak upon that and the work of the artist.
So I was going to, I don't know if you can speak on that very briefly because we are over at the time, but maybe this is a question that, you know.
So me being brief is just not an option. I will say, like, with my clients and collectors, people that I've worked with who have my works, the material aspects are really important to them, or like the discussions we have of gemstones, metals. But also I work a lot in bronze and you know, the patinas and colours, and some of my more expensive pieces are actually a combination of bronze and gold. And so it's the artistry that is most valued in that. And they know when they come to see me, they see my studios, they see my tools, they see my blowtorch and where I work, and they know that I only make a very small amount of works, but also that everyone I work with, in regards to, you know, I don't know, my bookkeeper or my friends or collaborations I've done with galleries, photographers, you know, I always treat people with respect and kindness. And I think that whatever you put out comes back in that way. So if we can all actively do that. I also think it's really important to value the idea of labour and not the exploitation. I mean, we live in a capitalist construct, and how we survive within that, or like how we put different values on different people's artistry or different jobs, I think that needs to shift. I feel really strongly with that about agriculture as well. You know, everything we consume and we engage with, we should conscientiously be doing, and that has impact collectively as a community.
Thank you. does anybody have anything to add to that? And then I do. Okay. Well, thank you so very much. I do, before we go, can you just tell them where they can all find you? I don't mean today in general, but I mean, Joy, your exhibition, and Bliss, your studio, and Sheryl, you on 47, just so people know where they can. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I have an exhibition now at Les in Lumineuse, which are art dealers who specialise in Renaissance and medieval illuminated manuscripts and jewellery. We have a show that's going on until the 10th of January. It's by appointment, so if you want to see it, please contact the gallery. And usually I'm in London in a studio with Cockpit Arts in Bloomsbury, so you can also book in things if you're in London. Yes.
And Joy is doing talks on Saturday at the gallery, and you can sign up through our website if you'd like to go and see her work and hear her speak about her pieces. Bliss, you just moved.
Hi, my name is Bliss Lau, and that's also my collection. And I had just moved. I have a new design studio and atelier space in Dumbo. You're all invited. If you'd like to come, you can book an appointment through my Instagram, which is just at Bliss Lau.
My company is my name as well, Sheryl Jones, and I have a website as well as on Instagram, and I'm located in the Diamond District. Actually, I'm in Rockefeller Plaza, which is just a block or two away from the Diamond District, so you can find me that way.
Okay, thank you. And now you can give them all a round of applause.